Ernest Hemingway said that all thinking men are atheists. Hemingway's legacy concerning women is a source of some controversy, but let's assume the best of him, in which case we'll conclude that he meant that all thinking people are atheists. Dame Emma Thompson, multi-Oscar award winner, widely regarded as one of the best actresses of this generation, says, "I am an atheist. I regard religion with fear and suspicion. It's not enough to say that I don't believe in God. I actually regard the system as distressing," she says. "I am offended at some of the things said in the Bible and in the Quran, and I refute them." And then Richard Dawkins, one of the chief evangelists for atheism, rather disparagingly says, "Offense is the last straw the faithheads clutch when they run out of rational arguments." Well, today, I speak to you as a faithhead. I speak as a person who has left behind the lucrative world of commerce in order to be a proponent of Jesus Christ. I like to think of myself as a rational, thinking person. I have 5 university qualifications and am busy with my 6th. But I'll leave you to be the judge today of whether my argument holds any merit at all. It is common cause and probably true for most people that their religious affiliation or their lack thereof is as a result of their birth. So you were born a Catholic, or you were born Orthodox, or Anglican, or Methodist, or Baptist, or Jewish, or Muslim, or atheist, or whatever it is. But being born in a garage does not make you a motor car, and it is certainly inadequate to roll the dice of your entire life to stake the outcome of your eternity on that which your parents did or didn't do. No, that will not do. These are matters we must consider carefully. American professor of philosophy, Stephen Evans, says that the stakes are very high. He says the person who believes in God and the person who does not believe in God do not merely disagree about God, they disagree about the very character of the universe. My aim today is not to cause offense, but rather in the spirit of rational debate to present 3 reasons for why I am not an atheist. You'll have to decide whether they are sufficient for you. My first reason is evidence. I want to argue that the evidence fits theism. Atheism has one simple declaration from which it derives all its conclusions. Atheism declares that there is no God. Now, logically, that's either true or it is false. How you feel about it is of no concern. It stands to reason that there cannot be no God and a God all at the same time. Christianity also has a root declaration, but Christianity's root declaration is not a philosophical statement, there is no God, but rather the declaration of a person. It's the difference between reading philosophy and meeting a philosopher. Christianity declares Jesus Christ. That is all it says. In its simplest, tightest, smallest statement, Christianity says Jesus. History is unavoidably shaped by Jesus. Our calendar is dated from his birth. Our year has pauses based on Christmas and Easter. Every major Western city has at least one cathedral in its center. His pronouncements still shape the ethical debates in our world today. He said, turn the other cheek. He said, love your neighbor as yourself. He said, do not judge. He said, do to others whatever you would have them do to you. In addition, Jesus was a literary genius. His parables are just sheer mastery. We know of lost sheep and prodigal sons and good Samaritans because of Jesus' influence on our language. We know of mustard seeds and buried talents because of Jesus Christ. But it's not those things that startle me most about Jesus. It's not even the miracles ascribed to him that startle me. If you take the time to read the accounts of his life, you'll find many accounts of him healing the sick, making bread and wine, walking on water, and even of him raising the dead. But of course, there have been many claims like those in history from leaders of all sorts of religious persuasions. The world is littered with shrines to saints that have supposedly helped the faithful. Adjacent to ex-President Zuma's palace at Nkandla is the Ngome Marian Shrine. It's a site that marks German Benedictine sister Reinalda May's supposed apparitions of Mary between 1955 and 1971. Collecting water from the springs close by is said to guarantee you a healing. No, it's not the miracles and the healings that are most puzzling about Jesus. It is instead his claim to be God. When you listen to Jesus, you'll find him saying just the most extraordinary things. I mean, he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. He says, I and the Father are one. Now, claims to godness we scorn in our world. They are the tragic delusions of insanity or the malicious words of a psychopathic liar. Except that when you meet Jesus in the pages of the historical accounts, his words don't sound like the words of a madman, nor do they sound like the words of a religious man either. Wherever Jesus went, he seemed to irritate religious people. He kept working on their holy day. He shared meals with outcasts. He wasn't offended by sex workers. He was offended by religious hypocrites, and he told them so. In fact, his challenge so incensed the religious authorities that they hatched a plot to kill him, a plot in which they succeeded. He was unjustly sentenced, brutally beaten, and then hung naked on graphic public display until he was dead, as a warning for all to see. The executioner declared him dead, and he was hurriedly buried in a tomb. And you'd think that would be the end of it all. But 3 days later, Jesus' followers began to declare to anyone who would listen that he was alive again. 2,000 years later, they haven't stopped. What they continue to say is preposterous, if you think about it. It is so unimaginable that it is laughable, except that they just wouldn't be quiet. They wouldn't stop telling it. People hated them for it. And almost without exception, those who claimed it died for that one simple statement. Jesus was dead, but now he's alive. That surely must mean that they believed it to be true if they were willing to die for it. Now, the problem with history is that by definition you can't repeat it. And so you can't experience it for yourself. Sometimes we're so grateful that we just can't repeat the wickednesses of the past, the wickednesses of the Holocaust or the Rwandan genocide or our own evil apartheid. But not being able to personally experience an event doesn't mean that you can't see the consequences of that event. And so know that that event in fact happened. You can see apartheid scars in every one of our cities. You can see it in our schooling system and our economic world without looking too hard. But again, consequences are not enough. To be sure about history, we call witnesses. That's what the Zondo Commission has been doing in our country for the last few months. That's what courtroom after courtroom does in every single nation of the world. Witness after witness testifies to corruption, even as those accused scream political plot and protest their innocence. Witnesses, well, they give certainty to allegations, and the more witnesses, the more certainty, and the more credible the witnesses, the even more certainty that they provide. When Angelo Agrisi testifies, we treat it with a high degree of suspicion because, well, there have been so many lies emanating from his very mouth. But when his testimony is corroborated by circumstantial evidence, by photos, by documents, and by other witnesses, we start to believe that Malusi Gigaba and Dudu Myeni and our previous president are actually corrupt, despite their many loud protestations to the contrary. And we do that same thing with all history. We listen to those that were there, and then we decide if they're credible. And if they are, we go where that testimony takes us, despite how extraordinary that story might be. As I've done that with Jesus, I found that there were over 500 eyewitnesses to the risen Jesus. 500 people actually saw him. It wasn't one or two religious fruitcakes. There are so many that I cannot simply dismiss them with the quick, "Oh, you must be mistaken." I must check out the credibility of these witnesses to see what was in it for them to say what they said. At the death of Jesus, they were a scared, insignificant bunch of men and women, but within days, they were addressing courts and authorities on the subject of this very resurrection. What changed them? What drove them? What motivated them? I noticed that they had nothing to gain from their testimony, and in fact, they had everything to lose. The claim that religion is a road to financial success is sadly often true, but it wasn't true in this case. The only thing they gained from their testimony was death and persecution and suffering and poverty and loss. Why would they speak then? Why would they say what they did? They didn't gain financially. They didn't gain prestige or power. They were and are to this very day hated for what they said. In the process of speaking, they pretty much lost everything. Now, of course, that doesn't prove that it was true, but it does prove that they believed it to be true. A person may die for something that is not true if they think it's true, but no person will die for a lie, knowing it to be a lie. These people died claiming Jesus had risen, and they had the opportunity to find out whether it was true themselves. You see, they could have gone and looked for the body if they weren't sure. They knew where it was buried. But no one could produce the body of Jesus because it wasn't there. The authorities couldn't produce it. The opponents of Jesus couldn't produce it. And the witnesses didn't bother to go and look because they didn't need to. And they didn't need to because they'd seen Jesus alive. They'd actually spoken with him. They'd touched him. They knew it was true. Their testimony seems to me credible because of what it cost them to make it. And so I'm left with a startling claim by credible witnesses. David Hume has said that theism, Christianity, is pre-scientific, unquestioning, antiquated, and simple-minded. Nothing could be further from the truth. The first reason that I'm not an atheist is because, having questioned the significant evidence that there is, I've gone where it takes me. That is the essence of good science. It doesn't let my presuppositions, no matter how strongly they are held, influence my conclusions. If Jesus rose, then his claims to be God are true, which means that atheism is wrong. We may not want that conclusion. We may not like that conclusion, but if we're honest, we must go where the evidence takes us. If you don't believe that Jesus is actually God, then I respect that, so long as you have considered the evidence and weighed it. Sadly, most haven't and most don't. Even Dawkins's famous book, The God Delusion, is the very thing that he accuses others of. Dawkins fails to deal with the very essence of the evidence presented for Jesus. He very articulately creates a straw man and then successfully knocks it down. But that will not do, because the stakes are so high. I'd urge you to investigate the evidence for yourself. Don't make the biggest decision you will ever make without a careful consideration of history. If you were doing postgraduate academic study and you did not interact with the primary texts, you would fail. Don't do the same thing with your life. Don't trust anyone. Read the text yourself. I'd suggest you start with one of the life stories of Jesus. If you have Jewish leanings, try Matthew. If you are pushed for time, read Mark. It is the shortest of the lot. If you're a medic, a doctor, try Luke. He was a doctor. If you're artistic and creative, if you love evocative language and imagery, well, then John is the one for you. Or perhaps just read them all. You wouldn't get married without thinking carefully about what you're doing. Don't stake your very eternity on your ignorance. Firstly, I'm not an atheist because the evidence for Jesus and his resurrection fits theism. Secondly, I'm not an atheist because atheism offers so little. May I explain what I mean? As I was preparing this talk, convoys of Russian armoured vehicles, of tanks, missile launchers, artillery and other support vehicles were encircling Kiev. Russian President Putin was urging residents of Ukraine's capital to flee because a large military offensive was imminent. He justifies his invasion by declaring it a defensive ploy against Western expansion in Russia's sphere of influence. He's also placed his nuclear arsenal on high alert. Incidentally, in 2018, the New York Post estimated that the detonation of more than 100 nuclear weapons will probably end life on planet Earth. In the same article, they indicate that the world has approximately 15,000 nuclear weapons, and 90% of course of which are in the hands of the US and Russia. Now, at the same time that Russia is advancing, Western nations are imposing increased financial and trade sanctions, even as South Africa dithers. Most Western nations are denouncing Russian action in the United Nations, even as they miss the incredible hypocrisy in their condemnations. After all, it was not too long ago that what President Putin is doing in the Ukraine was what they themselves unleashed on Africa, on Asia, the Americas, and Australasia in the scramble that we today call colonization. At the heart of a conflict like this is a philosophical question. It's this: who gets to decide what is right? You may want to phrase the question like this: what is truth? It's a question that we're grappling with as a world. Republicans and Democrats, CNN and Fox News in the US scream at each other as they each demand that they determine what is right. Capitalists and communists enact contradictory economic policy, even within the same government structures in our own country. Rainbow Nation or radical economic transformation are two phrases that speak of completely contradictory worldviews. But of course, who decides? Who gets to decide what is right? Some in our country genuinely believe that what took place under the Zuma administration was in fact right, while others cry corruption. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube increasingly censor content that they deem inappropriate. But who decides what is appropriate? Facebook this week decided to allow calls for the assassination of Vladimir Putin. As we contemplate this question, we notice that there is a universal belief behind it. It's a belief in moral accountability in our world. Towards the end of every year, the newspapers come up with their top 10 lists, the top 10 songs of the year, the top 10 stupidest things that politicians have said. That's quite a tough one for them to decide on. It would be quite hard to list the top 10 greatest evils of the last century. The deaths of millions under Stalin, his seeming glee at killing his own people. The deaths of millions under Idi Amin, Pol Pot, Rwanda, Bosnia. But I think that most would agree that one of the greatest evils of our time must be the Nazi concentration camps. Auschwitz was a tragic place where Joseph Mengele performed his medical experiments on humans. I'm told that a room stands with pictures of castrated children. Another contains images of the scalps of women whose hair was taken to stuff sacks. It's estimated that 1.1 million people died there. At its peak, 15,000 people were being gassed each day. At the Nuremberg war trials, Nazi perpetrators put forward the defense that they were simply following the law of their land. They argued that they were soldiers under orders, simply doing their duty. We scream with the prosecutor who in horror exclaimed, "But surely there is a law above our human laws to which you are accountable." But how do you define that universal law without God? In some civilizations, they have dogs for pets. In other civilizations, they eat dogs. But who's to say that eating dog is right or wrong? In some societies, they care about and they treasure their women. In other societies, women are merely belongings of their husbands. But who's to say what is right or wrong? In some societies, the powerful are free to kill whom they please. In others, the powerful are accountable to the will of the people. But without God, who's to say what's right or wrong? Without a God, you're left to the rule of strength. Is the US right or is Russia right? Well, it depends upon who is stronger at the moment. Would it be right or wrong for China to invade Taiwan? What about transgender and gay rights? What about euthanasia and abortion and all of the complex moral issues of our day? How do you judge? As a solution, atheism offers democracy or the rule of the strong. Democracy lets the majority decide ethics, but that led to the Rwandan genocides and the Second World War. Hitler was democratically elected. So perhaps an elite would be better suited to decide ethics. Perhaps a judicial elite or an intellectual elite or the financial elite or the political elite. In our own country, we pay lip service to democracy. But when it comes to ethics, a judicial and political elite decides, not the majority. That's what atheism offers. No reference point for ethics, only the shifting sand of fashion and uncertainty. And that means that if you decide that rape is right, which tragically so many men decide every single day in our country, then who's to say that you're wrong? If you decide that personal enrichment is right at the expense of others, then who's to say that's wrong? We see the unfolding horror of that ethic in our own country every single day. On an international level, if you decide to invade your neighbor, who dares to say that you are wrong? It seems to me much better to build ethics on the sacrificial, servant-shaped care of others that Jesus teaches and models. And then, if there's no absolute morality, then there is no prospect of meaning or justice in this world. Atheism's confident declaration that there is no God carries with it the unavoidable consequence that life is an accident. An incredible accident, beautiful accident, but nevertheless accident. Which means that you have no purpose, and the only reason to live is to accumulate as much personal happiness as you can possibly get in the shortest possible time. Many try that. Tragically, it so often leads to the despair that we see all around us. Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher who lived from 1844 to 1900, Nietzsche was an articulate and imaginative spokesperson for atheism. Perhaps his most endearing quality was that he endeavored to be an honest and consistent atheist. He endeavored to live with the consequences of what he believed. Nietzsche despised religion in general and Christianity in particular. He endeavored to look life in the eye with no God to obstruct his vision or to determine his actions. He saw no vast mind behind the world, and consequently he saw no light at the end of the tunnel. Tragically, if you know his life story, in late 1888, Friedrich Nietzsche went insane. Stephen Hawking says, quote, "Man is looking for why he is here," end quote. We constantly wonder why we're here. Atheism offers us no answer to that question. Jean-Paul Sartre, another famous atheist, said that humanity is haunted by cosmic meaninglessness, which we alone cannot solve. If there is no God, as atheism declares, then we're just tumbleweed, being blown by the wind of other tumbleweed. But perhaps worst of all is that atheism offers no hope in death. When it comes to the crunch, death is the ultimate problem. We can theorize about death until we bury someone we really love. Ed Sheeran, speaking recently of Shane Warne's death, said, "The world keeps taking incredible people away." You cannot theorize about death when the death is your 2-year-old child or your 18-year-old daughter, or it's your own death. Our family stopped theorizing about death when my wife's brother was tragically killed in a motorcar accident. Yesterday, I sat with someone who has very limited time left. In the face of death, the question is this: is there any hope? Death raises the question of justice. Will there be justice for unpunished evil? Death raises the question of finality. Is this it? Is this all there is? Death raises the question of positive relationships being permanently ruptured. In the old children's movie Prancer, Jessie is the lead character, and Jessie's mother has recently died. In one scene, Jessie is in conversation with a friend who says that she has difficulty believing in anything that she cannot see. To which Jessie asks, "What about God? You can't see him either. Does that mean you don't believe in him?" Her friend honestly confesses her doubts about God because she can't see him. To which a surprised and an agitated Jessie says, "But if there is no God, there is no heaven. And if there is no heaven, what about my mother?" You see, we need a solution to death. Atheism offers us nothing. I've been in full-time ministry for 25 years. I've conducted many funerals in my time. I've seen many tragedies. I've conducted funerals for people who live their lives as atheists. They may not be conscious atheists. They may not have articulated their atheism particularly well, but they live their lives practically as if there is no God. But I've noticed that when confronted with death, almost without exception, they become inconsistent. And they believe in some sort of an afterlife. And almost without exception, they believe that they're going there. But if there is no God, then there is no hope in death. And so secondly, I'm not an atheist, because atheism offers nothing for life in this world. Finally, I'm not an atheist, because the experience works. You see, I've met Jesus. I'm a rather ordinary person. If you get to know me, my life has not been a very glamorous one. I've never been a great sportsman. I'm not an influencer on YouTube. I played for a low-level cricket side. I come from an ordinary working-class family. I had an ordinary state education. I've never committed gross offences like murder or corruption. I've never done anything particularly remarkable. I've not been elected to high office. My life has been pretty ordinary. But one day, about 40 years ago, I realized that Jesus is God. And I submitted my life to his rule. And you know that during the course of those 40 years, I've heard him speak to me. As I've opened the Bible, I've heard God challenge me, rebuke me, encourage me, direct me, guide me, speak with me. I've seen him answer my prayers. I won't bore you with the many stories of his answers. Often God has had to say no to me. At other times he's made me wait, but many times he's said yes. This testimony, my testimony, will not stand up to scientific scrutiny. But there have just been too many coincidences for me to conclude anything else. I've seen God start to reconstruct me from the inside out. I've miles to go, but he's begun to deconstruct my utter selfishness and replace it with a genuine love for other people. He's started to take away the desire for respect that is so deeply ingrained in me. He's shown me that the desire for esteem can cripple me. And he's replacing them with a desire to serve more and to sacrifice more. Being a Christian has been the greatest adventure I've ever been on. I've found meaning in life. I've found reasons to live. I've found the cure to death. I've found the place of joy in a world that strangles you. I've found that life and relationships, well, they work when they're conducted God's way. I've been spared some of the enormous pain that I've seen in other people who have come to see me in my study. And I've concluded that living independently of God hurts you. As I've submitted to God, I have found that the pieces of life, well, they just fit. And I have hope for a future that is not like this world. And so today I'm not an atheist because the evidence for Jesus fits. Because the alternative that atheism presents offers nothing attractive. And because the experience of knowing God has been just the most remarkable joy. I invite you onto a journey like mine. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to chat with me or you'd like to chat with someone further, why don't you send us a mail on this email address? I'd love to hear from you. At the end of the video, there are lots of other ways in which you can contact us. Thanks for listening.